Welcome. So thank you, Frank Pucelik, the legendary Frank Pucelik, joining us today from the Ukraine. So thank you, Frank, for giving us your time. It's lovely to see you, and congratulations on being a finalist in the Public Service and Community category of the 2022 NLP Awards. So that's fantastic. I'm very lucky. We have nothing to do with selecting the finalists to keep it independent. However, I do get to read all the nominations. So I've got your nomination here, and I'd just like to read part of it to you. It says, Frank, a veteran of the Vietnam War, continues to support soldiers whose mental health was failing. He trained mental health professionals and opened several treatment centres for soldiers with addictions in the Ukraine, restoring their long-lost dignity. I mean, that's such a lovely thing to have done. So do tell us a bit more about this, Frank, and the work that you do that has led to this nomination.
When I came back from Vietnam, there were not a lot of services available for, and not a lot of understanding even about what PTSD was or what's the symptoms and so forth and so on. And I was a mess. I was basically psychologically destroyed in the war. And I saw too many. I was a doctor in the jungle for a year, and but not a doctor so much as an emergency medical technician.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And I was called a corpsman in the United States Marine Corps. So there were two of us corpsmen with each platoon, which was about 35 or 40 guys. Right. And we spent the vast majority of our time in the jungle trying to figure out how to stay alive. My job was to keep somebody from dying after somebody else shot them or blew them up or whatever. But since there was such a few number of us, and since there was only, our patrols were normally 6 to 9 people, and we were out in the jungle alone. So I carried a rifle, and I looked exactly like every other Marine because I didn't want to look like a doctor.
Yeah.
But I came home, I was a mess, and tried to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? I didn't expect to live. I expect to be killed. And so when I came home, I kind of looked around and went, oh boy, well, what do I do now? Yeah. And so I went back to college, and I started studying psychology to try and figure out what happened here. And I studied a lot of different systems like Gestalt and transactional analysis and so forth. And they were all pretty interesting, but they really didn't fit. Okay. Right. Fit me and whatever. I studied some of the systems that were the veterans were being applied to the veterans, and they by and large were worse than not useful. In most kids' situations, they were actually harmful to Vietnam vets, right, and to veterans in general, but combat vets in particular.
Yeah.
And there was an assumption by the psychological world that soldiers were damaged and had problems. And that didn't make any sense to me because I knew what I had survived. And I thought, for heaven, no, wait a minute. If I survived that means that I'm damaged, or that means that I learned something.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense, does it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so there was such a negative stigma on soldiers that I just really resented that. Yeah. And when I started looking into what was happening, I was finding that 9 out of 10 soldiers never went back to their second session with psychologists because they were so completely disturbed by the assumption of the psychologist.
Right.
Tell me about your problems. Tell me what's wrong with you. Tell me how I can help you get over, and veterans that survived the war basically realized somewhere inside of them that, hey, whoa, wait a minute. There's not something wrong with me. There's something right with me. I survived this, I survived that, I did this, I did that. Why are you treating me like I'm an invalid? I'm not an invalid, I'm a soldier, a successful soldier. So I set about, and I hated that. I hated the assumptions, and I hated all of that. And I was told that soldiers were basically destroyed. Combat soldiers were basically destroyed. You can teach them how to live in the world successfully, and they won't be killing people at home, but they're basically destroyed humans. I didn't like that. I didn't like that. I didn't believe it. So I set out to, I started getting treatment through some of the vet centers. After 10 years, the American government finally started to open vet centers. And they actually were fairly well staffed. They were all staffed by at least one combat veteran psychologist. And the combat veteran psychologist ran each one of those centers. And they were basically chances for soldiers to get together and help each other. And they were working.
Right.
And so I became a client in one of those. And then afterwards, I became a staff member of one of those. And then after, I became the head of the Central United States system, because I was taking NLP, which I had learned by then, and adjusting all of the things that were in the PTSD programs. And I started studying the ancient cultures, warrior cultures, because warrior cultures didn't have PTSD. And their soldiers came back from war, and they weren't killing people. They were heroes. They were, they were successful. And so I looked into those cultures, and I started finding out, what did they do? How did they work? What did they believe in? What, so forth. So I built altogether about 8 or 9 of the treatment centers in the Central United States took on my program.
Right.
And the adjustment to their programs with my program. And they ended up being identified as the best programs in the entire United States. And people were coming from all over the United States to study what we were doing in silly Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, in those central states. And we rocked the world. We changed the whole system. And then eventually they started going ahead and building those same systems throughout the entire United States. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of other veterans, that system saved the Vietnam veterans and should be installed today. But after Vietnam, those centers were closed, and those people were fired, and those people have not been rehired. So America is now having the same difficulties they were having before with veterans. Except, guess where? Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, where all of my veterans still are, and so forth. I came here, I found exactly the same problem. In Russia, they had a lot of soldiers that were killing people after the war and so forth. I found exactly the same problem. I trained several thousand psychologists and counselors and so forth, and they opened my style treatment centers in 11 time zones, darling.
Wow.
Time zones in Russia. And when I came to the Ukraine, and then they've had the problem here, in the last 4 years, I have trained 6,000 psychologists in Ukraine.
Right.
But I made a stipulation. I'm not going to train just the counselors. I'm going to train the counselors. I'm going to train the psychologists. I'm going to train the professors in universities that are training those people. And I'm going to have soldiers in every one of those programs. At least 10% of the people in those programs will be combat soldiers.
Right.
So the combat soldiers became the resource of relevant experience for all of those 6,000 psychologists. I ended up spending 2 years training 600 of them, 36 days over 2 years, to become leaders of those centers in the Ukraine, exactly the way I did in Russia and exactly the way I did in America. And now we are opening, I think, center number 11 in Ukraine.
Oh my goodness.
And they're doing incredibly well. And I'm blessed to see my soldiers. I call them my soldiers because they feel like my soldiers. And a lot of them are now opening centers, volunteering at centers, becoming important people in their communities, having happy families, and so forth. And they're mine. I love those guys, and I'm so proud of them, and they're doing really, really well. Yesterday, I got a phone call from one of my students who is a military corpsman like me, but in the Ukrainian army.
Right.
He told me he has been invited by the Ukrainian government to lead a training center for all of the psychologists in the Ukraine because of what's going on here now.
Yes.
And he said, I need protocols, I need procedures, and I need you. And so I said, you got me. So now I'm going to then enter into a new program teaching all of the new psychologists, social workers, and doctors into Ukraine to carry out the same system that I have. Not only after, but we found out that if you do some pre-programming for the soldiers, like they did in the United States Marine Corps, then they come back far less damaged because they're far more capable.
Yeah.
And so we're setting up those programs starting, I think, in a couple of days.
That's fantastic.
So,
I mean, I say it's fantastic. The work you are doing is fantastic. It's very sad that there's a situation that warrants that work. And it's wonderful that you are there to be able to support.
I'm proud of the soldiers here. I have now, I think, about 600 soldiers that are now going throughout the country, opening treatment centers, talking to people, working with governors, going to the mayors, going to schools, doing lectures for kids in schools about what it means to be a combat veteran.
Wow.
They're doing incredibly well, and I'm really proud of them.
That's so inspiring. So, as I said, I've got your nomination here, and it says, Frank Pucelik invests most of his income in the treatment of survivors soldiers traumatized by the Crimean War. He looks for them in person as he knows the places where they usually take refuge, such as under bridges and train stations. After a few months for one, years for others, they return to active life, manage to find work and start a family. They are restoring their long-lost dignity. These soldiers go back to their humanity. I mean, that's a beautiful testament to the work you're doing. And when you hear things like that, what does it mean to you to be nominated for this award?
Well, it's a pleasure, obviously, and I appreciate it. But honestly, my reward is seeing the smiles on the soldiers' faces and seeing the happy children and the families and seeing them come home from jobs that they're working successfully and so forth. That's the gift to me.
Yeah.
Is their lives and their experiences. For me, it's nice to be recognized, and I appreciate that. I'm an old soldier, and I think that it's good that somebody like me gets an opportunity to possibly be recognized, so that other people will realize what's happening, what's taking place, what's needed, and so forth. Because there are several million soldiers out there, combat soldiers, that are needing help, needing assistance, and so forth. And I've worked in. Are you ready? I've now counseled soldiers in 8 wars on 5 continents in 45 years. So I have centers in America, I have centers in Europe, I have centers in other places as well. And so I've been, and I don't get paid for any of that. And whenever any of the centers can't pay their bills at the end of the month, they say, Frankie, we need a little bit of help here. So I sponsor them when I can, and I have a tremendous number of the counselors are volunteers, actually.
Oh.
And they have other jobs, full-time jobs, but they come to work in the center because that's where their heart is.
Yeah, yeah.
That's where the real joy is for them, and I'm glad about that. And it's a very positive oriented system, not negative. It doesn't talk about your problems. It talks about your skills and your learnings. And the whole concept is that the people don't go back to like they were. They can't.
Yeah.
Once you've been in war, and once you've had to be an animal, and once you've had to look down the barrel of a gun and put a hole in somebody's head, you don't ever get over that. Actually, you must transform those experiences into what I call the man of wisdom, which is what the ancient cultures called it.
Right.
And they knew that when you ask a person to become an animal and go to combat, that you're asking that person to sacrifice their humanness for their entire life. They'll never have it back. But you are also making a second promise to them that if you survive, when you come home, we will meet you in a special village only for soldiers.
Right.
And we will help you transform all of that into wisdom.
Yes.
And so they would get, after they finished that process, and it's a very concrete process, they would get an emblem that showed that they wore on their clothes from that point on for the rest of their life. And every single person in that culture who ever passed that soldier would stop, give a little nod, and then walk on. Every single soldier, every single person in the culture for the rest of that soldier's life would say thank you every single time they saw him, with just a nod or just a look or something.
Yeah, that honoring.
And they deserve that so much, because they will never be human again. They'll never be okay. You cannot rehabilitate. You have to habilitate. You have to create something new. Yeah. And so that's what I do, and that's what I teach, and that's what I've done with myself, thank goodness. Hopefully that's noticeable in the world around me.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So what one thing in your work do you think is making the difference?
In my work with soldiers? Okay. I think that I train not only myself, but I train all of the people who work in my programs to be incredibly careful about their assumptions and their attitudes about that soldier that's in front of them. But that's the most important thing. And that when I see a soldier, like you read that thing there, I see a soldier under a bridge, he's dirty, he's a drug addict, his uniform is almost torn off, and he's laying there. When I see him, I see a man of wisdom.
Right.
I don't see a drunk. I don't see a drug addict. I don't see a loser. Okay, I see a man of wisdom, and I walk over to him and I treat him with respect. And usually you can tell a little bit of their grade or rank or something. So I walk over and I look at the guy and say, "Hey, Sergeant, get up, let's go. You're coming with me." And they go, "Oh," I said, no, come on. This is your unlucky day. And they go, "What?" And I said, "Because you met me. And I'm taking you to a place where 1 year from now, you're going to be proud, strong, and happy and be the leader of this nation, a leader of this nation. And you're going to do that because that's who you are." And they go, "Oh, no." And I go, "Okay." I reach down, grab them by the arm, throw them over my shoulder, and their butts right here. And I walk off and I carry them to the center. And I take them to the center and I say, "Here's another one. Take care of this guy. He's going to walk out of here a year from now, proud and strong." And they say, "Okay, okay, okay." And they take him in, and a year from then, he walks out, and he's Sergeant Black, and he is proud, he is strong, he is smart, he is happy, he is, and he walks out, and he looks at me, and he can't pass me without a tear, And he'll look at me and go, "Doc," I was a corpsman, so they called me Doc. He said, "Doc, damn, you're good." And I go, "Me? You're the good one." And so we smile, laugh, and punch each other like soldiers, and go on from there. And I'm lucky enough to have the opportunity to do that fairly regularly. But it's, if I'm going to work with soldiers and I have a combat veteran sitting across from me, and if I have any doubt on who that is, get out of his life, leave him alone, because you're going to destroy him. They don't know whether they're good or bad. They don't know whether they're okay or not okay. All they know is they've got this horrendous experience semi-locked up in them that they don't know what to do with. Okay? They don't know what's good or bad. So the moment some counselor looks at them like, "Oh, what?" It's over. Because that counselor is the person that they're supposed to trust, that's going to tell them what are they going to be, what's next. And that look on that counselor's face just told that guy, "You're bad." And he'll go, "Okay, I'm bad." And he'll go kill people and end up in prison. So that attitude, that assumption, what we in NLP call a calibration, right? That calibration must be positive and excellent and strong enough to overdo any negative feelings or ideas that soldier in front of you has. If you can't do that, and I tell counselors, if you can't do that, stay away from my soldiers, because you're not worthy of them. You hear the difference? Not they're not worthy of you. You're not worthy of them.
Yeah.
You know, and I did that once in a program, and I had like 600 people in Dnepropetrovsk, and I had about 25 soldiers, and the soldiers were all sitting together, right? And I told the psychologist, I said, you know, the one thing that surprises me more than anything else? And they go, what? And they go, that you guys lived through the first session. And they go, what? And I looked down at the soldiers, and the soldiers are all looking down and laughing. And I said to the soldiers, am I right? And the soldiers all stood up and said, he's right. And the psychologists are like, oh God.
Yeah.
And, so, and I love to shock a room full of psychologists like that, because then maybe they'll start to think about, whoa, wait a minute, some of my assumptions might not be so good here. And so I think that's the most important thing. Your skills and all the other stuff, that's all just procedure. You can follow the procedure. But if calibration is negative, you're going to kill a soldier and possibly his family. Yeah. And so I'm really hard on psychologists about that.
No, that makes so much sense.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it does. It does to me for sure.
So where would you like to see NLP, and particularly in the work that you do in the future?
When I teach the PTSD program, about 70% of it is NLP, straight up. Calibrations, complex equivalences, major beliefs, and so forth. And especially what I call the systematic use of negation. Do you remember what that is? Yeah. Okay, good. Because that's the most dangerous language skill in all of counseling with soldiers.
Right.
Because they don't care what the context is, they care what the embedded suggestions are.
Yes.
If your embedded suggestions are largely negative, then you're telling them you're largely negative. And you can be saying the right things logically, but you're damaging them. And so I'm pretty hard on the basic meta skills, right? And so I am in a regular workshop also, but you know, not so hard. So NLP is to me means if I know how to figure out how you think, if I can figure out how you think, and I can help you change how you think in a way that's comfortable for you, so that you think more effectively, then your life is more effective, then you're more effective. Okay? And so with soldiers, that's critical. That's the difference between whether they go to prison and whether they have a happy family and live life good. How they think. Okay. So that's very, very important to me. Without NLP, what I teach would be a good system, but people wouldn't know how to do it. Yeah. They wouldn't know how to make it work. Yeah. NLP is the mechanic structure that makes the whole thing really, really, really powerful. Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. Thank you, Frank. And as I said, what you're doing is so inspirational and aspirational for others to follow in your shoes. So thank you. Thank you, Frank. Thank you for taking the time to explain so much more about what it is you do and giving that insight. And as I said, you are a finalist in the Public Service and Community Awards. We will be announcing the winners live virtually on the 13th of May. So good luck, and we'll hopefully see you on the 13th, if not before. Good. Do you know that I have a whole system of working with young drug addicts and alcoholics is equally powerful and equally important in the world? Do you know? I know of that. That's not what you were specifically nominated for on this occasion. So it's, you know, that was kind of the essence of the nomination, and so that's kind of what I've based the that's what we've based this on. But yes, I know you're doing all sorts of lovely things. Good. Pleasure to see you as always. Thank you. And you too, Frank. Take care. And thanks for all your incredible work with ANLP. You guys are a miracle.
Thank you.
No,
We
you
do
are,
our
seriously.
best.
And you're making a huge difference for all of us in NLP. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Frank. I appreciate that.